Nothing in my life makes me channel the spirit of George Bailey more than the tradition police. You're just a bunch of warped, frustrated old men.
Everybody wants to be Jesus in the temple cleaning it out. Everybody wants to be the one turning over the tables and cracking the whip.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be the Jesus that forgives.
A lot of times the spirit isn't the one that's like, hey, you just got some water on your favorite clip art tie, and it's because of that guy. Go get him.
Yeah.
Tell him he's doing a bad job.
And now for a cultural callout. We sure don't appreciate that.
Welcome back to Salty Saints. My name is Hayden Holm. I'm joined today by my brother Tanner, and we are going to talk about a cultural callout that I have absolutely seen in my many years being a member of the church: the tradition police. So they've been in every single ward. These are members that are out there that love themselves some good old programs, but not just any programs that have been around for a really, really long time. And these members latch onto those programs so tightly that they would make a Pharisee blush. So let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. I have been screamed at, like verbally screamed at. Not once, not 4 times, but about 3 times. And every time I've been screamed at, serving in the church, it's always been when I'm in a leadership position, and it's always for messing up like the form of something. So I have apparently made the wrong ministering assignment, and I had this angry old high priest call me up and say, "You really messed up this time," and then he just berated me for like an hour of just like how terrible I was as a counselor in the elders quorum presidency. And then I've had people, I have been screamed at for making a comment on a Google Doc, just following up with people. I have been screamed at for pretty much some of the smallest things that you would imagine. It's not like big things. These aren't like huge over the top things. I had one guy come up to me because there was like too much water in the trays of the sacrament on which is one Sunday. It was just one Sunday. Usually doesn't happen. One Sunday, he comes up and he's just like, "Hey, I almost spilled on my tie today. This should never happen. All right, you guys really messed up big, and you need to fix this." And I'm just like, crying out loud, people. So it's a segment of people that just refuse to see people through the programs. Have you seen this in your experience, or am I just crazy?
Oh yeah, I see it all the time. Yeah, I think that it's really funny. I think that especially one about the sacrament cups, because I've had a similar experience before, where it's like the sacrament cups are too full and I spilled on myself, and that's your problem now. I'm like, okay, I guess it is. I guess we're
Right.
just gonna bypass the miracle of forgiveness that the sacrament brings to us. We're renewing our covenants, and we're just gonna focus on the little, water stains on your shirt.
That's
Like,
right.
okay.
The little water stains on your clip art tie. Yeah. No, the problem I
Yeah.
have, it wasn't the water cups, it was the tray. So while the teachers were preparing the sacrament, too much water had gotten into the tray. And so there was some water sloshing around down there, which usually never happens. And anyway,
Oh, well,
it was just like, just that
little
one
side-
there. He was waiting. That they're just waiting in their seat for that one Sunday, the one time something goes wrong, and then they're like, "Oh, this is just ridiculous. I gotta correct them on this." And then they make a beeline, and then they're like, hey, nothing in my life makes me channel the spirit of George Bailey more than the tradition police, where I look at these people and I'm just like, "You're just a bunch of warped, frustrated old men." Just talking to Mr. Potter, it drives me nuts.
Yeah, well, side note on
Yeah,
that,
go
when
for
I
it.
was a deacon, I remember that we had some interesting priests who were preparing once, and they pranked the deacons and incidentally everybody in the ward, because they filled up the water trays, like almost like the base,
Yeah.
about 3/4 full of water. So when we deacons picked it up, we were just like, "Oh no," because it started sloshing immediately. And
Yeah.
somehow we made it through, but there was a big discussion. So maybe that guy's had that happen before. Maybe he's been traumatized, and
I'm sure.
looks. But more often than not, he's probably just a cranky old dude. More fun. But yeah, they would never they would be appalled at the Last Supper with Christ, at how dirty things were, and how the lack of uniformity in the actual sacrament that Christ performed with the apostles there, with his disciples. they would be disgusted apparently by
Right.
by
Well, and
the
it's not to
lack of
say,
decorum on that.
like, I don't want to say like, yeah, decorum has no place. It's like, no, I get it. It requires and demands a lot of respect and reverence, and I totally get that. However, I do think there needs to be some grace given for like young men when they're preparing this. Like, if it's a prank, yeah, they need to be corrected on that. Absolutely,
No, for
100%.
sure, yeah.
But if it was like unintentional, let's give him some grace. It reminds me of that scripture that Christ quotes to the Pharisees in the Chosen. That scene where the Pharisees come and they're like, "Hey, you're eating with sinners and tax collectors and stuff like that," and he's just like, "I require mercy, not sacrifice. Just quit focusing on the form of everything.
Oh yeah.
Just give some grace." The other thing that I wanted to touch down on is the tradition police. It's not just about people that are correcting on little nitty gritty minutia of the church and things, but it's people that refuse to do things differently, even though that prophet is saying, let's do things differently now. So, for example, when the change was made from like President Nelson, ever since he's become prophet, and he says, we're cutting out the third hour, let's get into come follow me. Elders quorums, you're now taking on a lot of the responsibilities for the adults, and you're going to take over a lot of responsibilities that previously were handled by bishops. I know a lot of elders quorum presidents that still revert back into their old mindset of like, no, let me send you to the bishop, or yeah, this is the bishop problem.
Oh,
And
yeah.
this is, I'm just supposed to read conference talks and drop cane on elders who aren't doing their home ministry, right?
Their home ministry.
they refuse to get the name of it right. The home ministering, yeah. The deal is like, now I get like emotions come from a lot of different places. I get that a lot of times this is coming from experiences that they've had in the past. But what advice would you give to the average young father who's trying to hang in the church, who has young children, and who has every single reason in the world not to be active and not to go to church? And then they go to church and somebody corrects them over something super, super small and insignificant. What would your advice to that person be?
I mean, like, there's not much you can do about them personally. Just,
Right.
I wouldn't take it very seriously. Just laugh it off if you can. And that's going to be super annoying when people harp on you. These are the same people when I was growing up. Like, they just made heaven sound like not a fun place to go to.
Mhm.
Like, and they
Totally.
made Christ sound like just not a nice person.
Yeah.
Like they totally like sanitized the personality of Christ and the idea of heaven. The point where there's no fun and games. There's no humanity in it. It's just pure white, if that makes sense.
Right. It's pure
Like,
dogma.
it's
Yeah.
like,
It's like, yeah.
yeah, it's like, okay, I don't know. Like, there's got to be some flavor to life. There's got to be some different colors there, there's some vibrance, and that all comes with the human experience, which these traditional people are trying to actively like purge out of the Lord. And so when you stumble upon those as young fathers, just remember that they can't do anything to you. They can have their snotty opinions about what you're doing, but just smile at them and keep going. Because what you offer them grace in their failings, what are they gonna do? It's kind of like beating
Yeah.
them at their own game. Like,
Totally.
you just forgive them and move on. They have no choice but to face the atonement directly and also do the same for you. So, or
Yeah.
they can continue to be bitter. I can't assume that they would do the right thing at that point, but yeah. So try
Right.
and let it roll off your back.
I absolutely agree with that. There's a great book out there. If you are in a ward with a lot of tradition police out there that are looking for you, constantly trying to get you, there's a great book called Verbal Judo. It was written by a police officer, and it's basically a way to disarm just aggressive verbal attacks in a calm
Oh,
and respectful way. It's not trying to like own anybody with logic and facts or anything like that. It's just like, hey, let's bring it back down. Let's calm down a little bit. And it's how to deal with
yeah.
disagreeable people is the way that I would put it. he's got a lot of like great little quotes in there from like samurai and ancient, you know, Japanese warriors and stuff like that. One of them that he quotes all the time, he says, when someone aims a spear at your head, move your head. The spear goes into the wall and you have your head. And so it goes exactly with what you're saying. You know, it's like, hey,
Yeah.
somebody lobs this verbal attack on you, just let it miss, hit the wall. You don't have to get emotional. Don't get riled up. Don't hang on to that or anything like that. You know, just let it roll off your back. You'll be better for it. The other thing I would say, and this is what I've done when these corrections, seemingly big corrections, have come into my life. He gives some tools and tips on like, hey, add context. So a lot of times I'm like, hey, for example, with the Google Doc one, it was like there was this report that was going out, and I was just like, I don't know that this person is seeing it. So I was just tagging them in a comment saying like, just following up, are you seeing this? Have you seen this yet? And they understood that one way, and they thought that I was trying to step on their calling, and they like screamed at me. Like it was the weirdest phone call of my entire life. Like I get home, he calls me up, and I'm just like, hey, how you doing? He's like, oh, I'm great. You know, it just like classic Mr. Rogers voice. Yeah, I'm great. I'm just making some tacos at home. It's just all good. And then I swear I heard like a click go on, because after that, he was just like, what you have been doing is completely inappropriate and against the handbook, and I will not tolerate it anymore. And, you know, he just started going off on me. And I was just like, whoa, hands up, whoa. And it was crazy. It had me reeling for quite a bit, but because I mean, it was just so much. But then as soon as it was over, I heard another click, and he was like, well, I guess I've said my piece. Have a good one, you know. And so here's the deal. While he was berating me, I was just like, I set the context. I was like, hey, hold on. We're a couple generations apart here. I don't want to, but we're a couple generations apart. This is how I interpret this. If there's a report going out and I don't see that anyone's commenting on the report, then to me, that means that it's being ignored and that people aren't seeing that. And so I just wanted to call your attention. I'm not trying to step on your calling or anything. I didn't know that you had seen this, you know? And so can you understand where I'm coming from in this? And so being able to set that context, it changed the direction of that conversation. He called me back a couple minutes later. He's like, actually, I actually can see where you were coming from, and I'd like to apologize. And in that conversation, I was able to give him a little bit of, I was able to reverse the roles on him and be the form police on him and just say like, hey, I'm a young father. The rates of depression and self-destructive attempts for my demographic are the highest out of all demographics, especially the church. And so I'm like, hey, I was raised in a house where, you know, we went back and forth quite a bit. You know, we've got a thick skin. And so I'm okay with this. Like this is my jam. I'm okay with it. But I would caution against doing something like that against any other young man or young woman for that matter. I don't think they would ever do that for a young woman though. But for any other young father serving in the church, just don't do that, because you could drive them out of the church, or you could drive them into a much darker position mentally and spiritually.
Oh yeah.
You know? And so I was like, you gotta take it easy, man. Like, I don't know what you gotta do. Get on a cruise, go check out the Caribbean. You're retired. You got plenty of time. Go get another clip art tie, you know, get a Winnie the Pooh 4th of July tie or something like that, you know, like just take a breath and take it easy. So absolutely, I agree with that. Verbal judo, learn how you can kind of process that. You can, while you're talking with them, kind of strip out some of the pee and vinegar from their comments, set that context, and try and get a little bit of mutual understanding. So that's really, really important. The other piece that I would say, so in D&C, it gives us the formula for how to make correction in the church. And they say, no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood, only by persuasion by long suffering, by gentleness, meekness, reproving betimes with sharpness. Now, sharpness means with the spirit, clarity. It means that you have the spirit with you. And a lot of times the spirit isn't the one that's like, hey, you just got some water on your favorite clip art tie, and it's because of that guy. Go get him,
Oh,
Tell him he's doing a bad job. That's not the spirit.
Everybody wants to be Jesus in the temple cleaning it out. Everybody wants to be the one turning over the tables and cracking the whip.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be the Jesus that forgives. Nobody wants to follow that example. Everyone's ready to start rousing people out.
Yeah. And then the key part at the end of this verse, showing forth an increase of love, right? And so, like, with one of the corrections I got, it was like, hey, you need to do better at this. They were trying to follow this formula. Man, they did not put any thought into it, because they were like, but I did notice that you raised and lowered the stand really well today, and you are really good at that. Like, you can push those buttons really, really well. And I was just like, this is almost coming off more as like an insult than anything, but I'm not going to take it that way. I'm moving my head.
Good job, buddy. You pushed the buttons so good today.
You are such a good button pusher. It's like, that's what I would tell my toddler for pushing the button in the elevator. But anyway, regardless, I would say move your head on that. Don't take that personally. Let's see. Is there anything else that we want to touch down on when it comes to the tradition police?
Yeah, I think that I've run across the tradition of, I've had my fair skirmishes with the tradition police a couple times.
They're out there, yeah.
The gospel Gestapo. Like I've one thing I've noticed. I had a buddy who got called into the bishopric, and he loved his goatee. This is just a couple years back. And, he couldn't find anything in the handbook that said you couldn't have a goatee, right? Like you didn't have facial hair. So, and maybe there is, maybe he just couldn't find it. But he got corrected like this first week on the stand. A bunch of older guys came up like, you need to shave. You need to be barefaced, and his response was great, because he's like, I'm so sorry. I must have missed that in the handbook. Do you know which section I should look under? I'd love to study that a little bit more. And they're like, okay, yeah, I'll go check it out and I'll get back to you. And he said he had like 3 or 4 guys go home and study the handbook and like try and find
look at that
where it should be. And then like turn around and be like, I didn't see it in there. But there's this talk a long time ago that said maybe you should shave your face. Like, oh, okay, thanks, I appreciate that. And that, and there's a couple other like instances where I've seen that similar tactic of like,
I've had that happen
being
to me,
open. Yeah, you'd be open to it, and you ask them where they heard that or where they found that instruction, and they go off and either study it for themselves and come back and give you an answer, or they go off and realize that it's not really a thing, right? And if they come back with an answer, just be prepared to take it. Just like, okay, looks like there is some foundation for that. I'm going to take this. I'm going to go home, pray about it, and I'll let you know how it goes.
Totally.
So you can roll the dice with that, and it usually works out in your favor, because you're probably just a normal person having a good time at church. So.
Yeah. But no, I totally get that. I've had that happen to me before, where people are like, hey, did you lose your razor? What happened? And it's like, I get it. I heard one time that it was like in the 70s, it was like a sign of rebellion or something like that, and so you grew up. But it's like that symbol is long gone at this point. In the age of home-centered church, what is the takeaway for the average member of the church? Maybe it's a father, maybe it's a mother, somebody that gets corrected by the tradition police.
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to stand up for how you're operating and navigating, but do so with humility and grace. Understand the context, the emotional context behind what people are doing and why they're correcting you, and take it, accept it with a smile, and decide for you and yourself if you're going to follow that instruction or not. And or that correction from that rando in the ward, and move forward. Like, I think that's just the best way to do it, is that try and keep Christ in your mind as you do that, right? And it should be just fine. I've met very few people who can't be persuaded away from a negative interaction with kindness and a good sense of humor. That works almost every time.
Totally agree. I think the main thing to understand a lot of times, especially if they are correcting you in a really aggressive way, if they're yelling at you and stuff like that, I think it's important to understand a lot of times it's not about you. Like a lot of times they're yelling because emotions come from a lot of different places. So keep that in mind. The other time, the other thing that I want to point out is there may be a kernel of truth in what they are saying. And I think you were touching down on this. And I like that you called that out, because with some of the corrections that I've received over the years, there was one where like apparently I had made the wrong ministering assignment, you know, and so he gave me some more information, and I told him, I'm like, hey, good revelations based off of good information. And so after he told me that, he gave me some more critique, you know, and he gave it with all the tender loving grace of like a dull razor. But I was able to sit down and just take some parts of that and say, you know, I think we can actually make some changes in how we operate as an elders quorum and become a little bit more efficient that way. And we prayed about it, we talked about it, we made some changes based off of his feedback. So I was actually really grateful for it, but not grateful for how he delivered it. Like the delivery could have been a little bit better, but looking for those kernels of truth and then keeping Christ in your heart, I think that's the key to making it all work.